Welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast, where I, Genevieve Faulkner, share what I'm becoming aware of. Hello and welcome to the Becoming Aware podcast. My name is Genevieve Faulkner, your host, and if you're watching this on YouTube, hi. So I want to have a conversation today. It might be a little jumbled. I just had my daughter's birthday party, so I'm a little tired, but I wanted to get this done. I had a client come to me this week, and it was funny because she's come to me, I don't know, like on and off for since 2013. And she kind of started the session by saying that she was almost embarrassed because what she wanted to talk about was something that she'd already talked about with me before. And I told her not to be, because that's how healing works. That's how changing things work. A lot of the time, there's kind of like layers to the things that are unprocessed within our world. And when we go into judgment of ourselves for bringing things up, it actually locks us in this place where we aren't able to have the change that we desire. So never feel bad for bringing something up if it's something that you need to talk about to move through something. That's my little TED talk for today. So with that in mind, I want to talk about something that kind of triggered me this week. And I want to talk about it in relation to a number of different things. So it was connecting to like a post I saw with regards to a book that Access Consciousness is releasing about the elements of intimacy. And it annoyed me. And the reason why it annoyed me was a number of different things. Now I'm going to try and explain to the best that I can. Maybe not everything is going to make complete sense. And for some of you, if you haven't been trained in things like psychic development, telepathy, remote viewing, some of the things that I talk about might seem a little like crazy. So just understand that like I have had this journey for a very long time of exploring different things and kind of like developing different capacities that are beyond the norm. So sometimes the things that I need to talk about are a little beyond the norm. So elements of intimacy, they are going to release a book about, having more intimacy with yourself and the elements of intimacy, which is something that I used to teach when I was a certified facilitator with Access Consciousness. So there's 5 elements of intimacy: trust, honor, allowance, gratitude, and vulnerability. And in order to really have that true sense of intimacy with yourself, to truly know yourself, you have to be willing to be all of those elements. If you want to have a really good connection with another, you have to be willing to have those elements with them. This is where I get a little bit annoyed because it bothers me when, I don't expect anybody to be perfect, but I was effectively kicked out of this modality because I called out behavior that I wasn't okay with. And that related to telepathic abilities. There was a telepathic connection that I had with both the founder and the co-creator of Access Consciousness for many years. And that was kind of, for those of you that don't know the story, that was at times kind of acknowledged and then kind of they turned on me and gaslit me when I said I wasn't comfortable with what was occurring. So I want to talk a little bit more about that. I did share my story at one point, or I shared some of my story at one point, but I did leave some stuff out. And part of the reason for that is that I was still processing a lot, but also, I guess sometimes I don't feel like I have the full ability to have my words be my own. So what is it that annoys me about all of this? The thing that irritates me is everything that has been beneath the surface with Access Consciousness for a very long time. So I discovered Access Consciousness in 2012, and I discovered Access Consciousness through a a woman named Rika Zimmerman, who I just thought was amazing. Like, she was so good at facilitating. She happened to be Dr. Dane Here's girlfriend at the time. And they had some sort of, I don't know, issue where they broke up. And when they broke up, she was kind of pushed out of the company. And, you know, it wasn't pretty. Now, I didn't really know the story as to what occurred. What I know is what was going on in my head at the time. So here I was, having just discovered Access Consciousness, you know, absolutely loving what she was putting out and wanted to be like her, like wanted to be as good a facilitator as she was. And then the second she was made to leave the company and stop doing that kind of stuff, but then, you know, decided to do her own thing, I completely no longer resonated. I can remember in my mind having these thoughts about how, you know, it wasn't as good without the clearing statement, basically. Like, and so I started to look for somebody else to listen to. And that's where I got, you know, led to Dr. Dane Here. Looking back, as I reflected on my journey, now I thought that my telepathic connection with the two of them started in 2020. Looking back, as I dissected everything, it didn't. I think it started then. Why would it start then when they didn't even know me? I think that when somebody's got a certain, let's say, personality type or certain things that they haven't moved through, you know, something like, I believe that part of the conflict that was being created with him and his ex was something around business and her, you know, I don't know, trying to steal his business, or maybe they got threatened by how popular she was. I don't know. There was something with regards to that. So if you look at that energy and you know, when somebody's not totally functioning from maturity, they may get a little competitive. And when you've got all sorts of telepathic abilities, you can implant things in people's minds. Like, it's not as good without the clearing statement. So I think that perhaps there was, because of the, let's say, warfare that was occurring at the time with regards to that breakup, I believe that there may have been something going on where, you know, the founder or the co-founder was perhaps tapping into the people that had come to Access through Rika and was sending these messages so that they would stay in Access and not leave with her. So my next class, I go to the bars class once, and then the second bars class that I did, I happened to team up with a woman that met Dane on Tinder. And she just had this experience where, you know, she'd connected with him and then, you know, I don't know, something had occurred. And then it was kind of in the place of the avoidance mode after something has occurred, right? So she was kind of like way more interested after she'd gone to his talk and realized that he had this big following and was very kind of like, you know, wondering if she could kind of create a relationship. And he wasn't kind of responding to her. I remember at the time on Skype or something, or WhatsApp or whatever it was. So there was an element of avoidance with the way that he was behaving. And she was kind of, you know, not into Access in the way that I was at that point, because it was something that she had just discovered. Whereas I had been obsessively reading everything. So I kind of knew his standpoint on relationships then, and kind of found it, you know, it was kind of like listening to her story and finding it funny, the way that she was talking. And I was encouraging her to read the book so she would understand his point of view. But I can remember at the time, as we sat there at lunch and we were talking about him, I can remember, and bear in mind, this is when I'm working as a psychic. I'd done so much training in theta healing. I was very tapped in. And I was listening to Abraham Hicks all the time. And I was feeling really like full of energy and lightness from this bars class. And I can remember having this sense of like just this light energy and this question in my mind of, what are we here to create together? Now, that was me and Dane. And the reason why I had that question was because, first of all, to get to that second bars class, they had done a big class like literally across the road from my house. And I hadn't gone to the class because I didn't have the money for it. But I was kind of like, wow, that's so weird. I've been listening to these people online and they've come to London and they are literally doing a class across the house. Then when I meet this woman who personally knows Dane, I'm like, wow, that's so weird. Like, what is going on? You know, being into the vortex and whatnot. I was like, this feels like this person is circling my orbit. What are we here to create together? So there was that question. Looking back now, knowing what I know, knowing like how remote viewing works, knowing how telepathy works, I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if somebody's just hooked up with somebody on Tinder and they're going through that, anxious avoidant type dance, they're going to be aware of that person. They're going to be tapping into that person. And if they're having conversations at lunchtime, they might be trying to get a sense of what is going on. Now, that might sound a little bit out there. I used to work as a psychic and do psychic readings where I would have people come to me and they would want me to remote view, the bar that they were going to on a Friday night and see how everybody was thinking and what was happening at the bar and the dynamics of it all. I used to have people that would come to me whose partners would have addictions and they would want me to remote view and see whether or not like they were where they were supposed to be or whether they were lying to them. So these are the kinds of things that like I knew was possible because I could do these things. My clients would come back afterwards and be like, oh, you were so right. Like, this is what happens. So I think that there was an awareness of each other energetically for a long time before I ever went to Dr. Dane's class. Now, why is all of this relevant when it comes to an intimacy book? I believe because of my ask at the time, and my ask was, I was in London with my ex-husband. He was trading the stock market. He was was previously a hedge fund trader and had gone out on his own and was working for himself. And he was struggling with that. And so there was this element of ask in my world where part of the reason why I thought he was struggling was because he didn't have enough of a supportive network of men around him. And so in my head at the time, I had this kind of like desire of, because I've been listening to these people all of the time, there was this desire in my world of like, if I could just get them all in the same room together, maybe they could be friends and then they could be this support network. And then like what he wanted to create would be created. Like then he could live his dream. And his dream was like to create some sort of fund that would, make money, but would contribute to the earth. So I was like, this is so aligned. Like these people will be his friend. So I can remember at the time, like having these fantasies of like bringing them together. And I think that there was an element of, perhaps what I was energetically asking for was actually being heard. And I think that there was a telepathic connection created because of that ask. Because what occurred next was, there was years of me training as a CF. There was all sorts of different classes that occurred. But eventually, when it came to the second birth of my child, and I may have like talked about all of this before, I'm not sure, but anyway, when it came to the second birth of my child, I was extremely terrified of giving birth again. I'd had a really traumatic birth the first time, and it was just, I was convinced that I was going to end up dying if I didn't get help, because I had preeclampsia the first time. So I can remember Dr. Dane here did this class in Noosa that I went up to Noosa for. And before the class, I was having visions of me on the table. And it was like this knowing, like it was just like, this is going to happen. I'm going to be on the table in front of the class. Like this is happening. And I can remember saying to my husband at the time, this is going to happen. Like, don't freak out, but I know this is going to happen. Like I'm having these visions. I'm going to be on the table. And he was uncomfortable with it. He was kind of like, you know, if you do this, our marriage is over. And because it felt like at the time there was a barrel, you know, a gun against my head because I was pregnant, and like, oh my God, how am I going to actually get through this pregnancy, this labor? I was like, okay, I'm just going to do this anyway. So I went to class. We had a number of conversations, one about boundaries. He made fun of people that had boundaries, saying that they were creating walls. And one about preeclampsia, which assisted me a lot. There was a lot of change from the conversation and also the energy work that was done in front of the class on the table. Now, my husband, who wasn't on the class, happened to look in on the class to find out when lunch was going to be, right when I was on the table. And because of that, that created a change in his universe. So I think he realized in that moment how serious I was about needing something to change. And so he decided to start exploring access himself. And so the next time Dane came to Australia, which was February the year after, again, like right before I gave birth, him and Dane met up in a class. So my ex asked a question. It was about trading. Got Dane's attention. Dane offered to do a one-to-one session in his hotel room after the class. And I can remember him, you know, I had my young daughter at the time and was in this other hotel. And I can remember energetically him tapping into my world while he's doing this session on my husband, or my ex-husband now. And there was this moment of gratitude. Like it was like we were both acknowledging, okay, like this is, you know, there is something occurring here. We're working with, you know, the ask is being delivered. And so I was really grateful at the time. And it felt like almost like it was like, yeah, we're kind of in this together. We're going to help like shift what needs to shift within him. So there was this telepathic connection. Now that was the point where there was kind of like this opening for something else being possible for my ex. And there was this constant thought pattern in my head about, I've got to get him to Gary. And so my ex started to do the classes to get to this class in Malaysia where he would be able to meet Gary. And in my head, I thought that it was me kind of like, I guess, driving the ship. I thought that I was, I guess, encouraging him to do these classes, the prereqs to get him to this class to meet Gary, thinking, you know, okay, they are going to be able to, you know, meet up and create something together. Like this is going to work. Like this, there's something that's supposed to be created here. Looking back now, I'm not quite sure whether they were my thoughts. I'm not sure. I think that there was a telepathic connection the whole time. And I think that some of the things that I thought I was thinking and feeling were not actually my thoughts and feelings. Now, is there anything wrong with that? No, it was no to a degree. There was an element of whether or not it was me or whether or not it was Gary or Dane, there was a invitation to a greater possibility. And so we were heading in that direction. So Langkawi came about, they met each other, something was created, they agreed to work together, create a fund to try and, you know, for my ex to trade with, to try and create something that would contribute to access, and it would also, you know, contribute to us as well. So we pooled some of our money and created something. And I became more involved in hosting some classes and whatnot, you know, like just also being a CF and whatnot. And yeah, just getting on with life. The hope of what we thought the fund was going to be, it didn't quite kind of take off the way that it could have. And there was all sorts of things beneath the surface that were not being kind of addressed. There wasn't the communication that was probably required in order to create what could have been created. And there were times where my ex, you know, the last class that we all took together was in Melbourne, an SOP class, where my ex asked Dane a lot of questions, and there was a lot of things that came up, and there was a lot of stuff within, I think, my ex's family dynamic that contributed to, you know, things not quite working at the point that we thought it would. But there was also all sorts of things, I think, within their world as well, that was creating this inability for it to actually be the possibility of what it could have been. Around that time, because I was hosting, I can remember I went up to Noosa for a class and I went into avoidance. Like, I felt so uncomfortable with the thought of seeing any of them. And it made me kind of question in my mind about what it was I was avoiding within myself that was making me not want to be in a room with such psychic people. And that's when I realized that something had to change in my marriage. So I realized how unhappy I was, and I realized that, you know, in order to move forward, in order for both of us to grow, we were going to more than likely have to end the marriage. And so it was a really difficult time. And it was a very confusing time. And that's around the time that I became aware of the telepathic connection with Gary and Dane. And for a time, it felt like there was an element of them supporting me through what I had to do to leave my marriage, because it wasn't something that I wanted to do. Like, I absolutely loved my ex. Like, I loved him. I wanted to be with him. But I also could see how we were in this codependent enmeshment that was limiting growth. And I could see that that wasn't going to change unless something big changed. And so it was really, really hard. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, was leave that marriage, because the way in which codependency works is, you know, you feel guilty if you're doing anything that you think is going to hurt or harm the other. And there's this element of kind of seeing the other person through like in the eyes of like them needing your help. Like, I had a savior complex, so I just felt so responsible for my ex, also because he was from the UK. So like, I'd brought him out to Australia to, you know, we had kids in Australia. So, you know, there was a lot of responsibility and me feeling really bad about ending the relationship. So there was like a real gift to that connection. And there were times where it was really flowing. And there was all sorts of growth that was occurring psychically. The problem is that it wasn't acknowledged in the way that I needed it to be acknowledged. And there was also elements to it that started to feel a little bit off. So when you've got an ability to receive one another in the energetic realms, when you have this ability to be telepathic, but also when there's a lot of receiving of one another, and bear in mind, like, I had been non-stop obsessively listening to classes for like, I don't know, like what, 6 years at this point. There's abilities to kind of like merge your energy, and there's all sorts of, you know, ways in which you can play. You can kind of send messages to one another. You can send pictures, thought forms, like almost like movies to one another, and you can have all sorts of experiences with sexual energy that actually, you know, affect your body. So like, there was a whole universe of stuff that I became aware of throughout that journey, through having this connection. But it started to feel really seedy because it wasn't being acknowledged. And it started to feel a little bit more like, you know, if we had been including our bodies in the picture, then it would have been like a relationship. And so that didn't feel okay for me because Dr. Dane had a girlfriend. So that's part of what was creating the resistance in my world to having the telepathic connection. And so there was this element of that being at play, but there was also this I feel like, you know, Gary would kind of step in energetically to try and, in a way, like mediate what was occurring. Where am I going with all of this? Where am I going with all of this? Why am I talking about this? Sorry, I just got really distracted because there was this nice little bird that was on the fence, and so I started to look at that, and then I was like, now I've lost my place. Okay, so that's right. So it started to feel dishonoring. It started to feel dishonoring of me, and it just started to feel dishonoring of his girlfriend, and it started to feel, and there were elements of like, there were at times where the words or the energy that I was getting it was almost like I was being set up for a relationship in the future, and I wasn't okay with that, because if you were with someone in the physical world, you can't be fully with that person if you were planning a relationship in the future with somebody else. So there was this kind of like this unraveling that was occurring, where I'd put like Dr. Dane on this pedestal, particularly with regards to his energetic capacities. Like, I was wowed in the beginning because he had this ability to make people's bodies move from across the room, right? He had that level of communion where there were things shifting. And as an energetic healer, like, I was like, wow, this is incredible. Like, what he can do is incredible. The problem is that I sort of saw it through a healing lens, and I didn't see it through a lens of, you know, if somebody's got those capacities, you can use it for good or you can use it for your own selfish motives, right? I didn't like the selfish motives. And so there was a lot of like push and pull for a very long time. I got into the exploration energetically. Like, obviously there was the element of this being this supportive type energy while I was moving through my divorce, but there was also this excitement for me because it felt like it was something so beyond this world. Like, it was magic, but it was also like, I thought that it was something like uncharted territory, like I'm contributing to opening up new spaces. The problem is that it wasn't a new space also. So what I thought was new was actually something that they had done many times before. And as my awareness grew, I became more able to perceive how, like, when somebody's energy is dominating another, how you can actually see their energy in the person's body, right? So it's like my psychic ability kind of expanded in this weird way, where when I would do sessions, I would start to see the energy of people's mothers, for example, within their bodies, when they had allowed their mother, when there was elements of like them being disempowered by their mother or their father or whoever else, like ex-partners. So I'd meet all of these different people's energy through having like through working on one client. And so it was the same with access. Like, one of the things that bothered me was that I started to see the energy of Gary and Dane in many different people. And I was aware of the capacity that they had to be able to merge their energy with a lot of people at once, which is what they do in classes, like the whatever it is, ESC or whatever, I can't even remember now, but it's like the ability to be in communion, energetic synthesis of communion or whatever. I don't know if that was the right word, but that, the ability to be in oneness, they have that capacity, but there was something about it that felt really off to me, because it felt like there was this eradication of the other person's consciousness in the process. It's like they become completely controlled by them, as opposed to it being like true communion. And that's what I want to talk about. So the thing is like, I don't know, there's so much like entangling of like darkness and light, and there's some things that like I was completely okay about, and then there's other elements that like it was like, no, this isn't okay. So communion, I want to talk about communion, because communion is something, it's like being in oneness, right? It's having no point of view with regards to something else, so that you can actually have that energy of merging. And there's parts of that I am in alignment with. So, I believe that that's part of being like magic, part of being a witch, being in communion with the earth, having no separation between you and the earth, you and the trees, you and, the animals, can allow you to use the energy of all of that in your creative process of whatever it is that you want to create. I believe that you can have that also with people, and that can be a beneficial thing. But I think that there has to be also an honoring of the physical experience that we're all choosing to have as individuals in this physical world. That means that there has to be like lines, drawn with regards to that sometimes. So what I mean by that, like I've had the experience of communion with my two daughters. When I had children, like I was lucky enough to have the experience, and I will acknowledge that I think probably access did help with that. I had this level of communion with them where there was no separation between me and them in those first couple of years. Like we were so tapped into each other, and I could know what they required at any given moment. And there was this beautiful peace with that. Like I can remember having them in their little carrier, and just like having them with me all the time, and absolutely loving those moments because there was just this peace. They're totally happy to just be carried around. And there's like just this, there's just this energy of like this beautiful, beautiful connection. Now in that, there's that's what's created, because that's what's required, like ultimately for children to thrive in those first couple of years. Like I think that we are wired that way, to have that level of communion. I don't think it always happens, but I think that we have that level of communion with our mothers to make sure that our needs are taken care of, right? To make sure that we survive. And so there's this element of that kind of communion being something that we both commit to move through that process of mother and daughter in a way that allows the baby to thrive. But there's also like, and there's this element of being totally one with one another, but there's also the separation and the honoring and kind of like, I don't know, like the going with the flow of that. So there were times where they needed something. And if I resisted that, if I tried to have my own kind of sense of self beyond them and just do my own thing, they would ramp it up. Like they were willing to be this energy of control, where I very quickly realized in those times when they were like that, no, the best thing that you can do is to surrender to the process, give them what they require. And then it's kind of like everything goes back to that peace, right? That's the journey of communion with a baby, because that's what's required with a baby. Like you're playing the role of mother, like as beings. I don't believe we have, children and all of it's kind of like a role that we're playing in this reality. But that's the role, that's the agreement, right? Now, I think that you can also have that kind of communion with a partner. Like after Access, I went and did a tantra retreat, and that was really helpful for me to understand the ways in which we can kind of like merge our energy sexually and really connect to one another on this really deep, intimate level beyond words. And I think that that is a really beautiful thing, but it is a beautiful thing that should be honored and acknowledged. And it's like both parties should be agreeing to that, and it should be grounded in the physical world, right? By being grounded in the physical world, it's that just like acknowledging what it is, right? I think that the thing that bothers me with Access is that there's elements of an entrainment into communion, but I feel like there is this distortion with something else. It's almost like a hijacking, and there's a difference. So I feel like I'm rambling. If you're still here, like, thanks for listening, because I feel like I'm rambling. But I don't know. Hopefully it's interesting or you're learning something from this. This is just kind of like me needing to get this stuff out. What was I going to say then? Something came and then it just disappeared on me. One sec. Okay, so hijacking. I'm going to talk a little bit about hijacking, or what I became aware of after leaving Access. So there's all of that. Now, something that started to break apart for me was the realization of how people kind of, I guess, how people facilitate when they're facilitators of access consciousness, or some facilitate. Now, I studied theta healing before I studied access consciousness, and in theta healing, most of the classes are 90% prac, right? So we get together, we learn something, we go with a partner, we practice. Each person has vulnerable moments. We're learning, we're doing the skill, we're training the brain, all of that. In access consciousness, all of the most of the learning was through listening to previous classes that they've done, and then sitting in classes where they're facilitating and we're kind of like sitting, listening and asking questions, which is a very different way of doing things. Something that I noticed in the unraveling after I left Access was I could perceive the elements of gaslighting throughout the training. Like, there is elements of that. Whether or not that's a conscious thing, I believe it probably is, given everything that I'm aware of. But yeah, so there's elements of gaslighting. Now, when there's gaslighting, that is something that is, part of the process of brainwashing to break down the energetic structures of someone's world so that you can eradicate the personality that they have, so that you can then bring in this new energy or this new consciousness or this new way of functioning, so that you can to basically do whatever it is that you want them to do, right? That's how brainwashing works, right? So there was this kind of like unraveling through leaving access consciousness and looking at the training and the way that they kind of do that, and seeing elements of that being part of a brainwashing process. Now, I kind of knew this because I had thoughts of this years before. Like, there was thoughts about I'm brainwashing myself through the verbal processing. But in my head, that's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because if you are into any kind of mindset work or personal development work, brainwashing could be part of the process, because you're letting go of all of the limiting beliefs, and then you're bringing in, the new energy of what you want to encode yourself with. But it's very different when somebody else is doing that to you, or there's other motives, or, there's this kind of like secret kind of, well, just for me, just for fun, never tell anyone kind of thing going on, right? Which comes from this element of superiority and this unwillingness to have people be as aware as you. And that's the part that kind of bothered me. So I could see through, my journey of being an access consciousness facilitator and then leaving this place where throughout the training that occurs, but through that occurring, it creates the weakening in someone's kind of energetic structure that then allows the kind of person doing the brainwashing or gaslighting to merge their energy in a way with that person that allows them to then perhaps channel through them in a class or a session, right? So I could see where access consciousness facilitators, a lot of them sound the same, and part of that's from listening to the audios all the time, but I could see the energy of when they're embodying the energy of Gary or Dane, right? It's weird. It's weird to see. And I don't know whether other people can see it, but it's weird to see. And this bothers me. And I think that it partially bothers me because years before, now this is the way in which consciousness works. Like sometimes like the universe will bring me clients that kind of like have this connection to something that I've already moved through. So they're coming to me because they can sense that I can be the energy of what they need to be in order to move to the next step. But there's sometimes clients that will come to me that are almost like these gifts from the universe that are showing me something that I'm going to experience in the future. I just don't know it yet. And there was, I'm going blank again. Sorry, one sec. Okay, I remember. Yeah, so years ago, right when I started theta healing, I had this client come to me and she was German descent, and we did all sorts of work with healing her ancestors to help her feel like she could be seen in the world. Like there was a lot of resistance to being seen, being acknowledged, and that was creating all sorts of poverty programs for her. Because how can money find you when you're not willing to be seen, right? So when we did the digging work and kind of like looked at why this was occurring, it was because of the her German heritage. And there was this kind of like wanting to hide because of everything that the Nazis had done and whatnot. And so that got me, as we were doing a number of different sessions, there was lots of kind of exploration with regards to tapping into the experiences of the ancestors and getting a sense of like what it was that they were learning through having the experiences that they had. And so I learned a little bit about what that time was like through seeing the visions in my head and kind of like having the energetic communication, I guess, with the ancestors or the cells or whatever way it comes. But like what I could see was that I can remember asking the question of like, how did they get so many people to agree to what they were doing, right? How did they get so many people to join the Nazi party? And it was this process, like it was brainwashing, which is, isn't like really an epiphany. But the part that was really interesting was that I could see at the time, now I didn't know anything about brainwashing at the time, but what I could see was the consciousness. It was like there was this consciousness that had taken over every single one. So throughout that process of brainwashing that had occurred throughout the years before, and everything that was happening that they couldn't like deal with, they couldn't acknowledge, they became more and more vacant. They became kind of a little bit more disassociated and checked out, right? And that allowed this other consciousness to come in, and it's almost like, you know how birds fly in a flock together and they're all moving together, which is like communion, right? But it was like that was happening with the Nazis. So they all had the same consciousness. They were all energetically kind of like moving together. But it's like this dark energy. It's really insidious and awful. And so in my head, when I see the energy that I could see in access in other people, like I link it to that. And I'm like, this isn't okay. So that also created the resistance in me because I started to feel like I wasn't able to fully think for myself all of the time because I felt like my thoughts were able to be hijacked or corrupted by, these two people. And so I think that there is a big difference between having like the true beauty of communion, which may be something, which I think that both parties have to be consciously aware of and choosing to have from a place of empowerment and partnership in whatever way that is, whether or not that's with two people or whether or not that's with a group of people. There is a difference between that and hijacking someone's system or hijacking someone's consciousness and then taking control and using it for your own agenda. And that's the part that I'm not so sure on with regards to access. And that's why I didn't agree to kind of like moving through the steps to have my license, because I was like, I don't trust this anymore, because this feels like there's this kind of like sinister part of this where everything is not being acknowledged for what it is. It's not being I don't know, like created from the place of respect for everybody's autonomy, but rather it's like, I think that there was a point in time, and I can remember having the thoughts and I realized that the thoughts were not necessarily my thoughts. It's kind of like, I believe there's an element of, at some point in time, they became aware of the things that were going to be created in the future by others, and how that would hijack people's systems. And in access consciousness, you've got to be willing to be everything in order to not be the effect of something, right? So I think that they actively chose to then be the things that they could perceive might be coming, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making full sense, but I'm just kind of like, needing to kind of like release this stuff. So there's all of that. So how does this tie into intimacy? It irritates me. It irritates me that they are releasing a book about intimacy when they did not walk their talk, okay? They did not walk their talk with me. They did not walk their talk with many others before me. And, there's someone on my Facebook this week reshared an article that was done about Dr. Dane a couple of years ago, which is about a woman named Rosie in Australia who's in a wheelchair, who had this relationship, like a 7-year thing going on with Dane, where she had a special connection to him. And there's things that she felt like she was groomed or coerced in class, like you can look up the article. It's in the Australian newspaper. Now, that her sharing her story was really helpful for me in unraveling what I had experienced. There was a number of different things that were really helpful for me. So number one, as soon as I was made to leave Access because they said that I was unwell, or they whatever it is that they said, I don't know what they told their followers, but they made it out that I needed medication instead of acknowledging what they were doing, that I was not comfortable with, that felt overpowering and dishonoring of me. When that happened, I had a friend come to me who told me about other women that had the similar experiences of this merging, this ability to hear their thoughts and have communications this way. So there was this beautiful gift of other people coming forward to let me know that I wasn't insane. There was also, I had the experience on the Tantra retreat of a man sharing his story before I'd even told anything about mine, of his, and I don't know whether I've told this story before, but of him having a Qigong instructor that anytime he would go to drink, it was like the Qigong instructor would energetically all of a sudden be in his body with him and stop him from drinking, right? Some people have this ability. They have this capacity. They have an ability to be so congruent and in tune with others' energy. They can merge their energy in a way. And, when there's that mentor-student relationship, there's often an power imbalance where one's given their power over to the other, which allows that one to have an influence they perhaps shouldn't always have, or if they do have, they need to be respectful with that, right? yeah, so that was really helpful. But also then Rosie came out and shared her story, and I spoke to Rosie, and the conversation that I had with her helped me to know that everything that she experienced was real. Like, it's easy to read the article and perhaps think that, perhaps, she just got infatuated with him. No. I know how these people work. There was some sort of energetic relationship, I believe, that probably occurred for quite some time. That can't be in this physical world. And that's the part that irritates me, because I think that if you're going to have these intimate experiences with people in the energetic realms, it needs to be something that you're only willing to do if it's something that you're choosing in the physical world with that person. If you're not doing that, like if it's coming from a place of wanting to facilitate or heal people that come to your classes, you need to be really clear about like what it is that you're doing. Like if you want to be a sexual healer, like become a tantra teacher. Don't do it in some weird mask way, and then I don't know, it just there's a seediness that is not okay with me. So yeah, so where am I going with this? I feel like I've just ranted at you guys for probably about an hour now, but anyway, my point being, I think that, I don't expect anybody to be perfect. And I think that there is a lot that, can be true with regards to perhaps the things that they're teaching with regards to intimacy. But everything that I've shared today, I'm hoping gets the message across that there is an element of avoidance in these people's world. There's an element of needing control in a way that isn't what kind of creates true intimacy. Because if you're needing to control things, that's because you're afraid of like what will occur if you're not in control, right? Which creates stagnation. It stops flow. It doesn't allow like the expression of another. It's intimacy light, like it's not real. And that bothers me. It bothers me that I'm so like, I've had so many, I just watched Mark Facente's latest podcast episode this week about a woman who had a relationship with a guru, and it's just like the same story over and over again, different people, but it's the same story. And so I guess I'm just like expressing all of this because I don't know. I think that intimacy needs to include accountability, and I think that it needs to include honesty. And I think that when there's elements of a need for superiority that you haven't addressed within yourself, then that creates all sorts of insanity that doesn't work, and it doesn't create greater. And so, I don't know, my point is, if I have one, I don't know if I have one. I feel like I'm just needing to verbalize stuff. My point is really like, I don't know, like if you're, I think that the world is evolving, and I think that there is some things within access consciousness that have not evolved. And I think that it's important to acknowledge that, because I don't know, it's easy to get stuck in something when you're not acknowledging the full picture. And so I guess I've shared all of this, and it all sounds a bit weird and it might sound a bit ranty, but I wanted to share a little bit more about that story. One, for myself, because I think it's gone on in my head for so long. It's not allowing me to have the freedom to kind of like fully move into something new because there's, you know, been this constant thing. But also because I just want to call bullshit. Like, I just want to call bullshit. You know, like, don't write books on intimacy when you obviously have an avoidant pattern and you've been using women in the energetic realms to get a sense of intimacy that you perhaps haven't allowed yourself to have in the real world, for whatever reason. Like, it's gross. It's gross. As the world evolves and people become more aware of the energetic realms, and it is going to happen. It is going to happen. Uranus is going to shift into Gemini, and we are all going to become a hell of a lot more psychic. You know, I think that there is this importance of only being in the energetic realms the way that you would be in the physical world. If you wouldn't behave that way in front of a group of people seeing clearly what you're doing, don't do it behind closed doors, right? I'm calling for like more authenticity on this planet. That's what I desire. And so that's why I'm sharing everything that I'm sharing today, because I'm sick of the lies. I'm sick of the lack of integrity in leaders on this planet right now. So I'm hoping that if you've listened to all of this, awareness has popped for you in some way. Like, hopefully you didn't just listen to me ranting for an hour. Hopefully you did get something out of that. I don't think that access is the only modality that functions that way. I think that there's a lot of systems that have kind of been created in a way that perhaps may unintentionally function more in a brainwashing capacity than an empowering one. And I think that looking at that, the element of brainwashing and how that works, and looking at the way in which it does allow someone or something to take over the consciousness of another, and looking at whether or not, you know, you've been part of any of that, is an important thing to do. Because right now we have things in place on this planet to create that brainwashing function. And there may be an element of everything that I experienced possibly to contribute to assisting people to get free of whatever is being created right now to brainwash the masses, right? Like, if you can see it, you can assist people through the fog. So yeah, be aware that if you are if you're going into avoidance of things, if you're not being present in your life, if you're disconnecting and disassociating, you are allowing the space for something else to take over your vessel. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. So be aware, like, make sure that you're being present in your life in as much as you can. And if I were you, I would be trying to develop that level of, like, the muscular presence of, well, the muscular capacity of being present as much as you can. Because the more present you are with everything around you, that's where intimacy is. Like, that's how to have it, be it, receive it. But it's also what is required in order to have your own back on this planet right now. Because there is a lot of psychic warfare. There is a lot of stuff occurring beneath the surface that isn't being fully acknowledged by the masses yet. So yeah, I think I'm going to leave it there. Yeah, I don't think I've got anything else to say. I just needed to express it all. And just, like, you know, I don't have any contact with either one of them anymore in the physical world. I deleted their numbers because I did not, you know, when they decided that they could not treat me with respect, I didn't see the point in holding on to them. But yeah, I just thought I would say all of that with words, because I know that well, I know, they know what my point of view is. I think sometimes there needs to be the opportunity to hear it with a voice. So that's me ranting. And if you have any questions, or if you did get something out of listening to me rant, feel free to leave a comment for me. And yeah, thanks guys. I really appreciate you taking the time out to watch this video. And if there's anything else you'd like me to do a video on, let me know. Till next time.
And hope you are absolutely wonderful. And if there's ever any way to explain some of what you've gotten or been aware of, I think it might help the awareness of the communication that we have. It's like I've had, dynamic experiences of communication, many other things, along the 9 trannies level. And so just I don't know. We'll see what the future holds, but like I said, whatever might expand our awareness of what's possible, I think is phenomenal. And I adore you immensely. And what else is possible? Sorry I rambled for 4 minutes. Okay, bye-bye.